Connor,
Yes, Steve.
I can take a bragging Snyder. I can take a conniving Snyder. I just can't stomach a sentimental Snyder.
I can stomach any Snyder, Steve.
God. Star 80, Snyder Cut? When is that coming?
I hate how good of a joke that is.
This kind of is the Snyder Cut. It is more of a Paul Snyder movie than it is a Dorothy Stratton movie.
Yeah, I would say so.
God, we're 1 minute in and I'm already making tasteless jokes about this tragedy. Folks, welcome back to the conclusion. We're done with the 5 directorial feature films of one Sir Robert Fosse. Connor, the name of this series is
More Smoke, Please.
And today we're talking about the major motion picture Star 80 from the year of our Lord.
1983?
Yeah, kind of. It got a limited release in 83 for like Oscar stuff, and then it didn't catch any attention, and they just sort of dumped it in February of 84.
Okay.
A deeply, deeply uncommercial film.
Because I knew only 83, because I remember you telling me it was like 3 years after this event, and I'm assuming it happened in 1980.
Yeah, it did, like late 1980. Yeah. It was a very quick turnaround. Star 80. Connor, what was your history with Star 80?
I knew about it because they mentioned it one time in Fosse Verdon.
Yeah, this is sort of the forgotten stepchild of this entire filmography, which is weird because it is such a short filmography, and it is his last movie. Last movies are a lot of times kind of a big deal, and this one he sort of went out with a whimper in terms of like cultural impact. I was telling you because as I was jotting notes before we were starting down here, I couldn't find any information about the development of this movie. I still need to finish my freaking 20-hour long audiobook that was his biography. I've barely even touched the movies, so I haven't gotten there yet. I'm sure there's information in there, especially because this is again him being writer and director, so he's developing the script, I'm assuming, basically from the ground up. So obviously this was a topic that he felt he had a lot to say about. And I can't find anything because this movie's mostly forgotten. It's a Warner Brothers catalog title that does not have a Warner Archive Blu-ray, and Warner will put almost anything on Blu-ray.
Yeah, I used your SD Voodoo rental to watch it.
Yeah, It's digitally. It's only available on HD in iTunes. I looked everywhere. I looked at Amazon. I looked at every other platform. Because iTunes is the one thing I can't watch on my TV because I don't have an Apple TV. But yeah, it's the only place that you can get this movie in HD is iTunes. This movie's glossed over a lot. Based on his hat trick of director picture nominations, I think they were hoping that this was going to be a big Oscar play, and it wasn't. It was critically well received for the most part. It's sort of, with this subject matter, there was a lot of people who said, "How dare you?" And there was a lot of critics who really celebrated it. It just did not catch on in the culture at all. And hasn't really gained a cult following, probably because it's just so unpleasant to watch.
Yeah. It's
not an easy movie, in any way, shape, or form. It's the type of movie where you walk out, and I imagine seeing this in the theater, if you're with someone, it was we both just have to be quiet for about 10 minutes while we process some stuff. Did you know anything about Dorothy Stratton in general?
Only the stuff that you told me about when we talked about Star 80 a year ago.
Yeah.
Playboy model, killed by her husband, Peter Bogdanovich of it all.
Yeah, she was engaged to Peter Bogdanovich.
Yeah.
And that's most of my experience with Dorothy Stratton as well, is that I knew generally because it was sort of a big cultural moment. This was a hugely controversial thing. It brought up when it happened in late 1980. It brought up a lot of conversations of Playboy, pornography, like moral corruption in the United States, like the moral majority of the early Reaganites really used her as like an example of like what have we become, et cetera, et cetera. And then my other the version of the story I know is Peter Bogdanovich's version, because he cast Dorothy in a movie that he made called They All Laughed. Over the course of that production, they fell in love. I think this movie kind of futzes with the timeline of events a bit. I believe that Dorothy and Paul were already broken up at that point. When the movie stopped shooting, she moved in with Peter Bogdanovich. They very quickly became engaged. Things happened. They escalated very, very quickly. And it was in her trying to finalize her divorce that the incident happened. And then Peter Bogdanovich years later marries her younger sister. It's a whole debacle. He wrote a book about their relationship together that was sort of a biography of her as well, called The Death of the Unicorn. That's kind of been long out of print, but it's available online. I've read chunks of it. It's a very hard read, just because this whole event is so tragic that it just sort of weighs on you like a blanket. It is one of those, not to be a cliche, but it is one of those like rising stars just quickly as falls, like just one of these insane show business tragedies. So yes, and he's been very open over the years about his experiences with Dorothy Stratton. If anyone hasn't listened to the Turner Classic Movies podcast, The Plot Thickens, the first season is Peter Bogdanovich, basically an entire oral history of his life until basically the Dorothy Stratton thing, and then they gloss over a lot of stuff. But they dedicate an entire episode to her. And it's really, really heartbreaking stuff. And it's not just him being interviewed, but it's also her younger sister. So you get their perspective, both of their perspectives on the thing. And yeah, but we're not really here to talk about that because none of those parties had anything to do with this movie. This movie is based on a Village Voice article by the journalist Teresa Carpenter, originally published in the Village Voice, and it won the Pulitzer. The article was called Death of a Playmate. I imagine it was, fairly extensive. And I don't know if the Ladd Company or one of the producers buys the rights first, or I don't know if Fosse buys the rights himself. But he writes and directs this movie, and it comes out 3 years after Dorothy's death, and just crickets. Not much in terms of cultural impacts. A lot of things that got press. I mean, Eric Roberts got a Golden Globe. Mariel Hemingway got some good notices. There was a lot of talk about the fact that she got breast augmentation surgery. Years later, she said, yes, I did get it right before the movie started, but I didn't get it for the movie. So, I don't know. If that's something that you care about, I'll leave that to you. Mariel Hemingway can do whatever she wants. Do you have any general thoughts about this as part of the Fosse canon?
It's the least Fosse movie for sure. It's the one that feels the least of his stamp.
I agree. It's the least obviously Fosse.
The only thing that seemed Fosse to me was the repeated plot device of the interviews.
Yeah,
those things that felt like Fosse to me.
He readopts a lot of techniques that he uses more flashily in Lenny, to the point where he's playing the interviewer again.
Yeah,
he's even pulling that trick. So he's adding this very specific, sort of self-insertion. Watching this, I was trying to, because I was very curious, because like I mentioned, Fosse was not much of a writer. Like we talked about last episode, he co-wrote the book for Chicago, which was based on a series of short stories and a play. He co-wrote All That Jazz, which is based on his own life. But this is a story that he had no direct personal connection to, and he developed the script from the ground up. And I did hearken on a lot of themes. For one thing, it is generally it's a showbizy movie. It's a different side of showbiz than what he's from. It's about publishing and modeling, and she was an actress as well. But it's it's more about image and hype. It's a very West Coast story for such an East Coast filmmaker. 3 of his 5 movies take place in New York. The other one takes place in Berlin. But Sally Bowles is like a very New York-y type personality. And this is sort of Bob Fosse as an outsider coming into a different type of sort of showbiz world. And for me, a lot of my disconnect in the movie is like, this is a very West Coast story, and yet it lacks that sort of like weird, like hot desert energy. It's about the relations of men and women, how men see women, how they use women, how women have to navigate a male-dominated world. And primarily the thing I really tapped on, it's a high-status, low-status movie. Paul Snider is the ultimate low-status guy who wants to be in a high-status world. And Dorothy is able to make that transition much more smoothly than he is. And he deeply resents her for it. And Bob Fosse is like a very high-status guy, decorated with Oscars and Tonys and Emmys and all these things, but like grew up during the Depression and like came from like very even working class, lower class living. So he knows both sides of that coin. And I just imagine that this movie is very Snyder based. Large portions of the movies are told from his perspective pretty directly. Sort of like if not told directly from his perspective, it is usually scenes surround him and his activity. And sort of how other people perceived Snyder. And I can see Bob Fosse recognizing a lot of himself in Snyder. Obviously, Snyder in a much more monstrous way. But I could see a lot of the things that... Because it's very clear that Bob Fosse hates Paul Snider. Yeah. As he rightfully should. By all accounts, Paul Snider was this terrible, monstrous human being. And he portrays him that way in this film. But I can see a lot of the things that... And again, this is me making an assumption, but based on his body of work, I don't think it's that much of a stretch. Paul Snider representing an amplified version of all the aspects that Bob Fosse hates about himself.
Yeah.
The womanizing, being overly controlling, etc., etc., etc. Being just generally like a very self-centered, selfish person, which... Bob Fosse, obviously is at least aware of all these things. I mean, he made an entire 2 hour and 20-minute movie about it.
If not in a bad way at all. This felt like a TV movie. It felt like very contained in that way.
It's more stripped down. It's very low scale. Especially because we talked about our surprise when we watched Sweet Charity, just how huge the scope of that movie is, especially for a debut feature. This is very stripped down. It's because not a lot of crazy camera work. The main thing is the time jumps in the interviews. But even then, like, this is something he's done before. And if anything, this is a much more sort of accessible version of that. It's a very performance-based movie. It's a very just like director working with actors movie.
Yeah,
it's a performance.
Just letting Eric Roberts speak. Well, what do you think of Roberts in this movie?
I think he's a very good performance. A lot of my problems with this movie are at the script level.
Yeah.
I think they lay it on a little too thick at times. I think Bob Fosse is clearly someone with a very distinct voice, and he knows what themes he wants to tackle. The best example I can give is that scene with Roberts and her mother. Where he's just like, we're gonna do this, like, here's the shoots, like, we're gonna send them to Playboy, they're gonna fly us out, like this, that, and the other thing. And it's that whole monologue. It was like, together we could be somebody, da 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 da. And I think he's very eloquently like putting down, like, this is Paul Snider's perspective, this, that, and the other thing. And unfortunately, the mother character is saddled with like, this is the lesson of the movie. Like, her dialogue is far more blunt. Like, it's very laying down. It was like, this is the perspective of the quote-unquote reasonable side. And I think Roberts is excellent in that. Roberts was always very good at playing in things like King of the Gypsies, Pope's Greenwich Village, Runaway Train. A guy with a chip on his shoulder, a guy with something to prove. He seems very interested in like deeply flawed men. And I think the one thing is, especially because for how, like, Eric Roberts is very pretty. He has these beautiful piercing eyes. He has this very strong jawline. And you look at the Paul Snider, and he looks like, a guy. He looks like
Yeah.
you work in a butcher shop. And but Paul Snider, the person, probably in his head, he's like, I look like Eric Roberts. I appreciate how Roberts was like, I'm just gonna lean into the sleaze. I don't care if this makes me look like a monster. I'm all in on this part. It's a very impressive, like, young actor performance. And it's very flashy, and he's not afraid to go big. And I don't think that's even necessarily the wrong instinct as an actor. I think just sometimes the material isn't giving him the runway that he needs.
He's the big standout for me, I was going to say, Roberts in this. And I agree with you, like, the stuff where, like, he's sometimes too big for his own good. He runs out of space to fly, quite literally, but I think it works pretty well.
Yeah. But that's also, I think it entirely fits that character.
Yeah.
I think with this character, it's kind of hard to go too big.
Yeah.
Because Paul Snider, just by all accounts, was just like a really weird guy. When their roommate, the plastic surgeon, was like, it's the damnedest thing. He built a doghouse for King. And I have no idea why he did that. He just did it. Like, but in his mind, he was like, I'm going to get this done. Like, this is something that needs to be done. Like, you could see, like, in an alternate universe, Paul Snider is Tom Cruise. Like,
yeah.
He's just, like, that level of determined. But the problem with Paul Snider is that he wasn't determined on working hard. He was determined, it was like, I'm gonna be famous. Come hell or high water, I am going to be famous. And in the end, he ended up being famous because of this terrible murder. A lot of my issues with the movie, and I don't think it's necessarily Fosse's fault, because I don't think this is his intention, the way that the film is structured, and it centers itself around Paul Snider, I can't help but think if Paul Snider lived to see this movie, he would love it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the intention of the film. I think anyone else in the world is obviously like, well, this is demonizing this guy. But by focusing so much of your attention on this guy and trying to dissect him, you're kind of giving him exactly what he wanted all along.
You're giving him the attention, yeah. The world will remember Paul Snider.
You'll never forget Paul Snider. It's not the final line, but it is basically like, this is this character's thesis, and the movie essentially proves him right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an issue for me. I don't think
Yeah.
it's an issue artistically. It's just, ethically, I feel like it's kind of an ethical issue. I think if
Yeah.
you're tackling this subject, this level of tragedy, so soon after it happened, while the family and everyone who knew this woman are actively grieving, and you're thrusting this very intimate, very personal situation onto the silver screen, there are emotional consequences to the real life people who were involved. It's a problem that I have with a lot of based on true story movies, especially when they take creative liberties. On, an academic artistic level, I think that's totally acceptable, but like when you have to face it, it's like, this is based on true events, and not only true events, but true events where a lot of the parties involved are still alive and are still just trying to go about their business and not want to be bothered by the leering eyes of strangers. That's something that we have to reconcile with.
Is there an appropriate time to tell this in like a 10-year period of this happening? Because I don't think there's any like real right time to do this any time in the 80s whatsoever.
No, there's not a right time to do this in the 80s.
Yeah.
I
don't think there is.
No, I'm saying it was like, in order for me to I have to accept this movie on its own terms.
Yeah.
But I also can accept that I don't think this movie should have been made at this moment. And I don't think this movie should have necessarily been made by Bob Fosse either.
No. I don't think he's the right guy to do it either.
I think he was the right guy for the movie that he wanted to make. And for the movie that he wanted to make, he did it well. I think it's a good movie. I think it's quite a good movie that I have some very specific nitpicks with. It's not even like a separating the art from the artist. It's like separating the art from the inspiration. I have like, in order for me to appreciate this movie at all, I have to remove it from the real life Dorothy Stratton, because quite frankly, I think Dorothy Stratton deserves better than this.
Yeah.
I would prefer a movie. Me personally, I would prefer a movie more from her perspective. I would probably prefer the story told from a female perspective in general. I think if someone were to make a Dorothy Stratton movie going forward, I would probably want a female writer and director. I think there is Bob Fosse as a man, and as a man who throughout his career has made art about how men leer at women, brings a very distinct and necessary perspective. But I don't think that his perspective should be like the final, like, this is the final say on the Dorothy Stratton story.
It is unique, though. I feel like his, like, the Fosse sensitivity towards women we've talked about earlier just does kind of stop with this movie, which is interesting.
I don't think it necessarily does. I think he gives a lot of humanity to Dorothy while she is alive. And to the mother character as well, while some of the dialogue can be a bit clunky. And to the Eileen character as well, but she's a little girl.
Yeah.
It's just, unfortunately, I feel like Fosse goes to great lengths to constantly remind you, like, this is a person who lived. When we first see the glimpses of the murder, it is intercut with both her photo shoots. So he was like, all right, murder, terrible tragedy, intercut with the photo shoots, image. Her giving very thoughtful answers to, like, earnest, sincere answers to questions that are purposely trying to make her look stupid. So it's like, tragedy, image, humanity, like all that, like, he's inundating you with these images. It's this sort of cacophonous effect. It was like so much is happening all at once, and it can be a bit overwhelming, and a bit muddling. I think he constantly wants to remind you that she was a person until the point that she becomes a body. Because the entire film, it was, I feel like, and a lot of the credit I think goes to him as both the writer and director, and we're going to talk about Mariel Hemingway, but major kudos to Mariel Hemingway, who gives, from all the performances I've seen, the best performance of her career. And it was like the entire world, except for, you know, her small circle of her mother and stuff, sees her as a body. But the film was like, no, this is a person, until she is quite literally a dead body. And that's where the film sort of loses me. Most of my problems with the film is in that last 20 minutes. Let's just go into it. I do not think the level of detail that they go into her rape and her murder is necessary at all. I think it's gratuitous. I think it is actively exploitive, and not in, like, Fosse is constantly straddling the line of classy and sleazy. It's part of his whole, what I was talking about earlier, high status, low status. He's making very sleazy things with a polish. Your Sweet Charities. It's about, you know, a call girl, a dancer, but it has this glossy Hollywood musical thing. Versus All That Jazz, which should be like a glossy Hollywood musical thing, and he's dumping all the sleaze, like all of his horniness, all of his libido, all of his self-hatred, all the drug use, all the drinking onto it. Fosse is taking inherently sort of sleazy material of a murder-suicide and trying to give it that polish of, like, a very prestige-y Oscar biopic thing, while also mixing in the Hollywood New Radical movement. And it feels gross and leering, and I hate it, because this entire movie I got to see Dorothy the human being, and I don't want to see Dorothy the body. I really don't. I think Dorothy deserves better than just the body. And I think you, Bob Fosse, agree with me, because you're talking about how this entire movie you spent saying isn't the way that people have treated her image awful. The one section of that I do really like is, whilst this murder is happening, we cut to Hugh Hefner, and he's looking for the next Dorothy Stratton. And we cut to Aram, and he's editing her image in his movie. So even in her death, this exploitation of her image continues. That, I think, is a very valid point that he's trying to make. And yet, I feel like he creates a double standard by going so far into the grisly detail of her final moments.
Yeah.
And I'm watching this last night. I'm watching it with Sydney, and I'm watching it. And I'm like, I cannot imagine being her mother or her sister and having to watch this. I think it's cruel. I think it is cruel. And I can see what he's trying to say. I think it's entirely unsuccessful, and I think it negates a lot of his earlier arguments.
It's the same thing we talked about last time, talking about, to a much lesser extent with all that jazz. But just watching the movie and just being mortified by how Bob Fosse sees this aspect of you. And you tell he really does respect Dorothy. And I think at the end, he has the best intentions, like you're saying, with showing how her image is still being exploited, by also exploiting her in the absolute worst way possible. So it's, this movie's not fun to watch at all. But I never was, actively, mortified until those last 15 minutes.
No. It's really... I mean, a lot of the movie's very hard to watch just because actively watching the Paul Snider character manipulate this, very nice, well-meaning person, innocent person. And when their relationship starts, a girl, she's 17, she's underage, and the woman that she's with at the time, while he's actively hitting on her, just says, she's a baby. And she's not wrong. Mariel Hemingway has, this body, she looks like a fawn, learning how to walk. And he's sort of molding her into this ideal woman that he wants to see. And she's just trying her best. She's this nice, sweet person who's trying her best. And and then she's, thrown into this industry that just, takes and takes and takes. And these reporters who give her sneering, leading questions, just because how dare she be this beautiful woman? I think he's commenting a lot of the double standard of how women are perceived in our culture in general, that continues to this day. Just when she's I'm really studying. I'm really trying hard to be an actress. And someone says, "Oh, are you reading the classics?" And she's like, "No, acting mainly. I don't really know anything about music." Because, she's this girl from Vancouver. She was working at a Dairy Queen. She's not part of this, she's a low-status person suddenly thrust into this high-status world, and this entire room of reporters are laughing at her. But she doesn't know any better. And that's the thing. And, all of this happened so quickly. It's a dropped line. It's just, I feel like I've lived 5 years in this 18 months. The film starts with the title card, Vancouver 1978, and it really doesn't tell you when we hit 80. It gives you sort of hints, because we know that she becomes Playmate of the Year, and he has, the license plate star 80. That's why it's the title of the movie. They really hit home the fact that that's the license plate. He spells it out. Bob Fosse literally spells it out for you.
Yeah.
Mariel Hemingway, surprisingly first billed. I think because she was just a very notable public figure. She was in Manhattan, obviously. She was a model. I think at this point, Personal Best had already come out. Not that was a huge movie, but it was a notable thing.
See, I know nothing about Mariel Hemingway.
Oh, nothing?
I don't think I've seen her in anything.
Did you know that she's Ernest Hemingway's granddaughter?
Not until literally right now.
Yeah, she's Ernest Hemingway's granddaughter. She was a child model. Both her and her sister were child models. So she, she's kind of the exact opposite of Dorothy. She was always a high status person, and she had always existed in this world of image and, people really taking advantage of her sexually, emotionally. And then she plays the stand-in for Woody Allen's child girlfriend of the time in Manhattan, and his grand glorifying of his terrible behavior. So yes, it's because she has a lot of emotional connection to Dorothy, and really the stretch for her was how do I be a normal person?
Yeah.
Dorothy Stratton was this everyday girl who was thrown into this crazy situation. Mariel Hemingway was born into these crazy situations, into this high status world. I think she's fantastic in this movie. I think she has such deep humanity. I think it's interesting because Dorothy Stratton's Canadian, but in Vancouver where there's less of an apparent accent, so she's just kind of leaning into like a Midwestern thing.
Yeah.
With her voice, which I found to be very amusing. I think part of it, because Mariel Hemingway, she has such a specific face. She's such this like specific, stunning beauty that I think a lot of people don't really know how to approach that just in general or as an actress, and they don't really know. A lot of times her parts, like they don't give her an appropriate enough challenge for her to rise to. Because the first thing I ever saw her in, she was like the semi love interest in Superman 4. So like 3 years after this movie came out, like that's where her career was at. She was in the umpteenth Superman movie that was not even produced by a major studio. It was a canon film. And that's how disregarded she was at the time. I'd like that Bob Fosse just gives her a lot of business. Like that she's constantly has to be doing something, whether it's like taking a bath or she's like taking a Dairy Queen order, or she's like, I love the Playboy Club when she has to, and was like, oh, and she was like, oh, I can't lean over, and she has to do this very specific move. I was like, that's called the bunny dip. I think this is one of the few roles I've ever seen her that actively challenged her, that actually that she had a task that she had to rise above. And like I mentioned earlier, she has a modeling background. She is a very natural beauty, the way that Dorothy Stratton was a natural beauty. So her greatest challenge was like, now you just have to be. All this other stuff that other people would have to train specifically for this part, that's second nature to you. Just really focus on where this character is at emotionally.
I like her in all the scenes. I think she's great. I think her and Roberts are the two like big standouts for me in terms of like, well, we go to Cliff Curtis, but in terms of like someone who's like, I feel belongs to me and someone who doesn't belong in this movie. She definitely like finds her place, and I think she's very good. And knowing literally only the three things for Dorothy Stratton, the fact that she was married to a guy who ended up killing her, and then she was a Playboy model. She like filled in all the gaps very well for me. And it's a thing where it's like, obviously we don't think a lot how like this person's obviously acting. And while I know she obviously was not the real Dorothy Stratton, I never once questioned her in any capacity.
Yeah, she doesn't have an emotionally false moment.
Yeah, no, there's not one false note in her performance. Where you can obviously, it might be the script's fault, it might be whoever's fault, but there are moments where you can see Eric Roberts acting. She does not have a second of that.
Next we have Uncle Ben himself, Cliff Robertson.
Yeah,
John F. Kennedy himself, Cliff Robertson.
He also played JFK.
Yeah, he played JFK in it was a movie that came out while JFK was president, about JFK in World War II.
Interesting.
PT-104, I want to say. You know that crazy thing where JFK basically saved an entire submarine?
Yes.
It's a movie about that.
Yeah. No, here's the thing. He's not bad in the movie at all.
No, good
It's
actor.
just like, I never once see Hugh Hefner the entire time he is on screen.
No, and I think it's more just that Hugh Hefner is such an indelible, like, iconic figure in his own right. Because, like, even us, and we grew up long after Playboy's major cultural relevancy. Like, this moment that this movie is portraying is, like, the last time that Playboy was even, like, financially solvent. And I was thinking about this earlier. I'm like, who even, like, when was the last time that a Playboy playmate, like, actually made a big splash, like, culturally? And I think it was, like, Pamela Anderson and Jenny McCarthy. And that's like the mid-90s.
I didn't know Jenny McCarthy was a playmate.
Oh yeah, that was her start. She was a playmate, and from that, all the MTV stuff, like hosting stuff, like she very quickly made that transition. But that was like the last time it was like, here's a face, and then she got interviews. It was like, oh, she has like a very distinct personality. She'll play well on television, and she like blew up from there. That was like the last time that could ever, because that's the mid-90s, and by the time we get to the early 2000s, internet speeds are just fast enough where you can get pornography whenever you want.
Yeah.
And that's and in addition to like the death of print media in general, because Playboy always much like Bob Fosse, always straddled this line of sleazy and respectable.
Yes.
Because there was like, I read Playboy for the articles, but they actually had like very hard hitters, like Playboy interviews. Like if you had a big like 12-page Q&A in Playboy, that could do big things for your career.
I don't have much to say about Cliff Robertson. He's in the movie. He's Uncle Ben.
Also, it's like considering, because like you have like, because at a certain point, like Dorothy Stratton, Playmate of the Year, now she's acting, and he just kind of disappears. Like the movie doesn't have much narrative use for Hugh Hefner after a while. Here's the thing. I feel like Cliff Robertson is one of those. He's like an actor who's incapable of giving a bad performance.
Yeah.
I think it's just like this material only needs so much from him, and also you have the impossible task of playing an icon.
Yeah. Who's next on the docket?
Carol Baker, who in the credits is just credited as Dorothy's mother. She doesn't even get like a Ms. Stratton. I think she gives an incredible 3-scene performance. Where one scene she's given amazing material, and for 2 scenes she's given the most let-in material. Carol Baker was like a young television and theater star in the early 60s. She was like a sex symbol in her own right. She was like a very early, mid-century sex symbol. So I think that's very canny casting on Bob Fosse's part. And in that first scene where we see her and Paul together at the prom, and she just opens the door and she just immediately laughs in his face. And I forget, like, the very, like, deceptively cutting thing she says. You look like a pirate? Or I forget what
it was like salsa dancer or something.
Yes, you look like a salsa dancer. Where she's like, we know that she is, like, absolutely roasting him, and Paul Snider, who will take any compliment that you give at him, even if it's an insult. Like, Bob Fosse gives her a very fun game in that scene. It was, like, constantly say, like, a polite thing, but in your eyes, like, just flick a dagger with your tongue. And the one time that she is very directly, like, sharp with him was, like, get your feet off my table. You gross-ass 20... we know Paul Snider is older than Dorothy Stratton. I don't think they ever specifically say
they don't.
How much
I always
older.
assumed he was, like, late 20s, early 30s.
Because Dorothy Stratton was born in 1960. He was 29. He was born in 51. Or at that time, so yeah, he would have been like late 20s. He died when he was 29. And then the scene where he's like pitching her on the whole Playboy thing, and she just has to like, I'm her mother. That's a failure of the dialogue she was given. And when we cut back to her interview, and she's just like, they got signed, but I never would have signed it. It was like, we get it, Bob.
We get you never would have signed him, yeah.
Yeah. It was like, you don't have to lay it on this thick.
Yeah. That line, I don't know how they got signed.
Yeah.
I mean, I know how they got signed. They were signed by Paul Snider.
Yeah. Or he got a female friend of it. Like, somebody forged a signature. Yeah, any other thoughts on Carol Baker? I think she's a very good but very short performance.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. I'm going to let you take the lead on this one. Because we know him from 2 very specific places. Roger Rees, who plays Armand.
Do we know him from particular places?
Yes. He is on Cheers, where he plays, like, the rich boyfriend of Rebecca.
Oh, fuck. Yes, I'm sorry.
My
brain shut down for a second. Yes, I know who that is.
Yes.
Yeah, and Roger Rees.
And then he played Lord John Marbury on The West Wing.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, he's the guy in Cheers, who's Rebecca's wealthy British, like, boyfriend, who goes to prison for embezzlement.
Yes.
He's good. The funny thing is I couldn't really be absorbed by him, because the whole time I was thinking, this is Peter Bogdanovich.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. Like, it's Bob Fosse having to say, this is not Peter Bogdanovich. Look, he's British. He wears sweaters. There's no ascot. He doesn't have glasses. He's very soft-spoken. It's the one character where, like, legally, like, they definitely could not be that
Yeah.
person.
It just only does so much when you very
Yeah.
much know, like, there is no one else it could be.
Yeah, and especially because like Peter Bogdanovich is such a specific personality. Like it was like he has glasses. He talks in this very like transatlantic accent, and he constantly wears frickin' they look like ascots, but it was like it's actually a bandana. I picked it up on the Last Picture Show because it was in Texas, and everybody in Texas wears bandanas. Like he's like a very specific guy, and Roger Rees just plays like I don't know, sort of like British intellectual.
Yeah.
And Roger Rees, who like those two performances, they're like very heightened. They're like like he Lord John Marbury. You know, he's like a British duke in the context of The West Wing, but that performance it feels like he's playing a drunken Doctor Who. Like that,
Yes.
like Roger Rees is very good at like sort of clownish, very eccentric performances, and he's just sort of saddled where it just feels like you're like the nice guy that he ends up with. It's just not a very interesting character at all.
No. It's funny, I didn't know he was in the movie. To the point when he showed up, I was like, oh, it's that guy. That's when I branched it down, because he said Roger Rees. Like, who the hell is Roger Rees?
To the point, I thought that this movie specifically avoided the Bogdanovich thing entirely. I thought the way that the movie was going to approach it was she goes off to make a movie, she has an affair with a guy, she comes home, she gets murdered. I thought they were going to avoid it entirely. The fact that they do have a placehold character that's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, I just like, yeah, it's an approach. It was just like, all right, if you can't make him Peter Bogdanovich, give him something. Like,
Yeah. Hey, he's a sweet British guy
yeah.
who make picture show.
Yeah, it's just like besides like the obvious like the stereotype that you know directors and actresses, because like the very specific power dynamic and like it can create that can be a very intimate relationship. Like a director and actress getting together is not that much of a stretch. I have no idea why Dorothy would ever go after this guy. Besides, like he's a man in power, and he's nicer than Paul.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it's insulting to Dorothy that you're barely giving us anything to see why that she would be attracted to him. Not that Roger Rees is an unattractive guy, but it's just like within within the context of the movie, we do not have an emotional reason why Dorothy would be drawn.
That's
to him.
very true. My mind just did the Mad Libs on it and was like, oh, they're going to end up together. Don't think too hard.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I should have thought harder.
Which is just like, it's shorthand, and shorthand is fine, but once again, when we're dealing with somebody's life, she deserves a little bit more than shorthand. And it goes again to my greater issue. For a large chunk of this, while she's off in New York making the movie, it becomes very Paul-centric again. It's very much about like how Paul is reacting to this relationship falling apart. And there's just a moment where it's just like a scene, she's calling to Paul, it's obvious that she lied, like she used the same lie that she used earlier. Paul, one of the crazy character details about Paul is that he's basically Cam Jansen. He just has this weird photographic memory. They say he never forgets a name, even if he met the person once 5 years ago. And it becomes very Paul-centric, so it's just like, Dorothy, she's lying on the phone, a lot of Paul stuff, she's in bed with, Aram? It's not Armand, which is a more...
It's Aram, I think.
Aram. It's a very specific name. And then they're in bed together, and then we cut back, and now she lives with him. Like, it glosses over that entire relationship.
Yeah, they're just together because movie has to mirror real life, and thus they were together.
Yeah. And again, in the real life situation, Peter Bogdanovich and Dorothy Stratton, they lived together for a series of months, and they eventually became engaged. Whereas the timeline of this movie feels so much more truncated. Where it's like, I don't know, I guess she has a boyfriend. Like you guys are getting a divorce.
They moved in together for about a week.
Yeah,
once they got back to the States,
it feels very short.
Yeah.
And that line where and that what I was talking about earlier when we're cutting back to Hugh Hefner and we're cutting back to him continuing to manipulate her image, it resonate like the Hugh Hefner hits because we all know who Hugh Hefner is. We don't really know who this director guy is besides that I don't know. I guess they like each other. this movie has like this very specific. It was like it's about men's obsession with this woman. Paul Snider obsessed with her image because he feels like it can be his ticket to fame on top of the sexual aspect. Hugh Hefner obsession with this woman's visage, the way that he was obsessed with the visage of women in general, and made his entire fortune in this empire, a cultural movement out of the visage of women like Dorothy. And it feels like Aram, like, you should really lean into the fact, like, you can't stop thinking about it. Like, the real life Peter Bogdanovich, like the death of Dorothy Stratton, like, ruined his life, and he wrote a book. Like, he wrote a whole ass book where he compared her to a unicorn. It's called The Death of a Unicorn. And I don't feel any of that heat from this character.
There's no connection there, really, no.
Roger Rees, he tries his best.
He does. He was
fan.
not given anything to do.
No.
Good actor.
I'm
Just
always
really
happy
given
when he
nothing.
shows up.
Yeah.
The next three are very small, but I want to talk about them. Stuart Damon, who plays Vince Roberts, a television actor that Paul and Dorothy meet at the Playboy Mansion. I just want to, it's not that much of a role. In fact, he's only in that one scene. I'm kind of surprised that he's above David Clennon, just because I think it was just because he was a bigger actor. He was like a very big theater and TV guy. It's just a very funny scene where Vince Robert has to very politely deal with all of Paul's like phony bullshit. And just I was like, I'm doing a lot of reading, and then when he's finally leaving, Paul gives him the thumbs up, and he gives like a very like sarcastic. It's a similar thing that I love with the mom character, where she's like, this guy does not realize that we are dunking on him, and it's like a very sort of like thumbs up, and he turns around and it's a middle finger. It's a very funny one scene performance. I just wanted to shout it out. Any thoughts on Stuart Damon playing Vince Roberts?
No, he's good.
Yeah.
I like that scene quite a bit, and just how like not getting it Paul is.
Yeah. I
and
love
just dealing with him.
It's like, I love that show. How long has it been off the air? A year? And then he just goes 3. And he was like, wow, 3. Any chance of it coming back? No.
We need to see you. I'm rooting for you to be on TV again. He's like, thanks.
That means a lot. It's funny because even like outside of the show business thing, we've all been at the family reunion with the one uncle you don't like, and it's just like,
Yeah.
David Clennon, who plays the very commonly named Geb, the plastic surgeon, their roommate.
I like Geb.
I love Geb. I love how much of a fucking schmuck Geb is. And it's like the entire time, like in the interviews, it was like, Geb sucks. He's like your stereotypical, like LA plastic surgeon was like, I don't believe in status symbols, but in this area, the Rolls Royce, it's an investment. I see it as an investment. Like he really leans in on that point. But like compared to Paul, he's Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
Like there's that scene where, Paul is just like berating him while he's shaving in the bathroom, and it was just like she's sleeping with the director, this that Hollywood fucking phone, like this that, and like Paul's just going on this, and Gab's just like, okay, first off, calm down, and he's just like, Dorothy is like I've read the exact, she's like a once in a lifetime beauty, and like she's in play, like you have to like her pictures are everywhere. You have to accept there's always going to be someone, who's going to be like after her, trying to get in her pants, whatever. And it was like, all you have to do is trust her and let her know that you love her. And it's just like, and it was just like the most obvious thing in the world. And this guy who's like, kind of like, is like a skeezy guy in his own right. It was just like, I'm going to give like the basics of humanity to you right now. And Paul's just like, it's still like, he was like, you're right, man, you're right. And then he says like a thing that's like part of his delusion. I do love, it was just like, I love it was, just the fact that it was like Paul spending their money faster than she can earn, so they need a roommate. Just like a very specific detail. That it's just like, that's how you know this is based on real life, because no writer would come up with that.
Yeah, exactly.
No writer would just be like, what if this couple, because couples, they usually live by themselves. What if they just had like a roommate?
No mention for the sister?
She's like 11. She's fine.
She's good.
She's not as good as the little girl and all that jazz.
No, she's not.
I like the scene I actually really like the scene at the carnival with her and Paul.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice little, because it talks about, it's just like there is, like, most people can read the bullshit off of Paul. But to a certain type of person who's, like, a little disconnected to the world, the way a child is, there is an appeal to Paul. Like, he's giving me attention. He's buying me candy. Like, he's taking me on rides. And that comes in an escalated form with Dorothy. It was like, he has big ideas. Like, he has a plan. He treats me nice. He buys me things.
Yeah.
Until we get the sour end of the stick.
Yeah. You can't quite see past the facade yet.
Yeah.
You're too hopeful to see the evil.
The last thing, we touched about this earlier, how this is like a very West Coast story, but Bob Fosse is like a very East Coast person. So it doesn't really have the sort of California feel that I feel like it kind of needs. I think a lot of it just comes like, this is a relatively small budget film, so it's just like, obviously he can't shoot in the actual Playboy Mansion. You have to double a lot of locations. We're kind of hopping all over the place. But it's just like, and a lot of this movie is done in like close-ups and in interiors. We rarely get to see nature, but there is like a haziness, and like, there's a reason there are so many noir stories that come out of Los Angeles. Like, it just sort of has this sort of, like, vibe of just, like, this is a town that shouldn't exist. We're in the middle of a desert, surrounded by mountains, and that, like, no life should grow here. The fact that Los Angeles not only exists, but thrives is kind of spitting in the face of God. We are taking an unlivable place, and we are stealing water from other places just to function. That just sort of lends itself to, like, crime and immortality, and a lot of these things can be escalated on if you like watch Chinatown or read any sort of history of Los Angeles or watch Los Angeles Place itself. And it doesn't really have that feel. And the movie I kept thinking about while watching this, and I'll connect it back to Dorothy in just a second, was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Just because Quentin Tarantino grew up in Los Angeles, knows that area very well, I think really captures certain neighborhoods and areas of the greater Los Angeles area so beautifully. And also, because while I was thinking about how he treats Sharon Tate versus how Bob Fosse treats Dorothy Stratton. And I feel like the key is, a lot of people, I feel somewhat validly criticize the portrayal of Sharon Tate as more of a symbol and not entirely a human being. She's the least developed of the three principal players. We see these little moments of her life, and she mostly is just like this happy, so like she's dancing to Paul Revere and the Raiders, and you know, she's the sort of Virgin Mary heavenly like pregnant woman. And we get to watch herself watch a movie, and Quentin Tarantino really leans into the symbol of Sharon Tate more than the person, whereas Bob Fosse really tries to was like, no, this was a person, this is a human being who lived and loved and was hurt, and but I feel like there is a level of deep admiration felt for Sharon Tate by Quentin Tarantino. Was like, and to the point where it was like, I can do whatever I want as the creator of this narrative, and I'm going to show mercy. I'm going to show the mercy that the real world refused to give her. In this beautiful little world that only exists in the imaginations of myself and the audience, she can live on forever. Versus Bob Fosse really delving into the gritty reality of her death to as I mentioned earlier, to a fairly unnecessary amount.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Bob Fosse should have made up a new ending in which Dorothy Stratton lived all of a sudden, but it just they weirdly complement each other in their similarities and their opposites.
Yeah, I just rewatched Once Upon a Time. I didn't even think about that. It's a very good astute observation.
They had very sort of similar reputations. It was like this beautiful up and coming like stunning beauty, naturally charismatic on camera, where they were known as these beauties that were just killed so young and so tragically. And their murders have outlived their lives.
Yeah.
Connor.
Yeah, Steve.
We did it. We talked about Star 80.
I did.
We talked about... What's the likelihood that you ever watch this movie again?
Probably, I'm going to say low single digits.
I don't think I can stomach it.
I'm gonna say like 3%.
This story in general, I just find to be so upsetting.
No, I'll save this for sure. Of the 5 Fossies, this for sure has the lowest chance I'll watch it again.
It's just
by a long margin.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
It's brutal. And it's a very, I think it is a very, it's a very angry film. And it's Bob Fosse, angry guy.
Yeah.
But I could see it was just like, it is him going through everything he hates about himself, everything he hates about pop culture, everything he hates about show business, like all these different things. It was like the wrong, and it's just, and I think for this type of story, I don't think anger is enough. These were very complex people in a very, this movie's short. It's like a clean hour and 45 minutes, which usually I applaud. As you've known, I've said 105 minutes is like the perfect running time. I think this is a story that needs more time to breathe.
Yeah.
I feel like, and like again, like they've kind of like they haven't truncated the timeline itself, but they've truncated how the timeline feels. Something that's months feels like weeks. And on one level, I can applaud the economics of that storytelling, but I don't think this is the story to be economic on.
No, it's not a story you want to rush through by any means.
I will say that we have one lost Bob Fosse film.
Do we?
Yes, he was developing a biopic of Walter Winchell, who is a gossip columnist and radio personality. There was a script written. They were in active pre-production, and when Bob Fosse died, and they had cast Walter Winchell. It's going to be Robert De Niro.
Oh, wow.
We have missed out on a Bob Fosse directed Robert De Niro performance.
Wow.
And that is a tragedy.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie did not do well, but Bob Fosse continued to work even as his health rapidly declined over the 5 years between this and his death. In that time he found a way to win another Tony, direct another musical and win another Tony. So, and then obviously the review of Fosse, which premiered pretty much right as he died.
Yeah. In fact, in the show, he's like walking to the premiere of Fosse when he dies.
So yeah, Bob Fosse, icon, artist, weird fucking guy.
Weird fucking guy.
This is, Connor, this has been a hell of a journey.
It has. So question for you.
Yeah.
Now that More Smoke Please has wrapped up, is there a clear favorite Fosse in your eyes of the 5 films?
That's really interesting, because I like all these films, and I like them to different extents, and I like them for different reasons. I still would say that Cabaret is just kind of a perfect object.
Yeah.
Though Sweet Charity was the pleasant surprise.
Yes, it was, for sure.
Sweet Charity is a movie that I can see myself, like, a year from now, I'm like, I'm going to watch Sweet Charity again.
No, I think about just segments of Sweet Charity all the fucking time.
Yeah.
Sweet Charity.
Was the big discovery of this entire thing. And it's one of those things where it's like, all that jazz, there's huge chunks of it that I love, and there's other things where it's just like, all right.
Yes.
And Lenny, I think, is another movie that I think, for large swaths of it, is brilliant, but also it's just so hard to watch. It's so depressing. Similar with this, though, I think there's large chunks of it that are brilliant and hard to watch, and there's hard chunks where it's just like, I don't think that was the right choice for this, Bob.
Yeah. No, Fosse for me is he's a guy with 2 great movies and 3 really good ones.
Yeah, he there's not a stinker in this bunch.
There's not a stinker.
There's really not a stinker. Which is just like, there are directors who have only 5 movies and they still find a way to make one stinker.
No.
And I'm not saying that it would be impossible for Bob Fosse to make a bad movie. Obviously, we'll never find out. But I think it's one of those guys where it's just like, he never half-assed a movie.
No.
Like, whatever he did with his full sort of like fire and bravado. I do find it interesting that this is the least stylish of them all.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a budgetary thing. I don't know if he's just like, I don't want to distract from this narrative. Because like I said, I disagree with a lot of the choices that he made, but I think he felt the weight of this. And I think he felt the importance of telling Dorothy Stratton's story.
Yeah.
I think in his own way, he tried to be respectful But yeah, I think this is a great exercise, and I feel like if he's a director that should be talked about more.
Yeah.
Even if like we've mentioned before, two of his films, Cabaret and All That Jazz, are basically canonical. His entire, and he's an incredibly celebrated artist in the theater world and the dance world, obviously. But I feel like in the film world, he gave 5 very distinct motion pictures, and they're all worthy of discovery and discussion in a way that they aren't currently.
Yeah.
And I think that these 5 YouTube videos should be required in every college film course.
Yeah.
I
was going to say, to the fact that we are both recent film school graduates, I don't recall Fosse being mentioned once.
No.
So.
And it's one of those things where it's just like when you're trying to like give a grand overview of cinema, a lot of the specifics get lost. But like it's kind of insane to me that there isn't like a Letterboxd contingent that's just like dedicated Fosseites. Connor, thank you again for joining me on this crazy journey.
Thanks for having me
on this thing that we really do for ourselves, which is how
we do. The fact there's like 10 episodes that are just in the ether.
It's more than 10. It is more than
10 was a realistic number, a humble number.
That was very kind of you to say 10.
Are we up almost like 20? Are we almost that high?
Dumb and Dumber, 3 X-Men,
God,
Oceans, so that's another 4. Two
Nicolettes.
2 Nicolettes, and then Fosse. It's 15.
15. Okay.
Yeah. Connor, thank you so much for joining me. I always love talking to you about fucking dumb bullshit that doesn't matter because the Earth is on fire. Connor, take us out.
Well, Steve, the odds against us are at least 100 to 1.
Those are the best odds I've ever had.
About.
No, what?
James Gunn apparently pitched to both Warner Brothers and Marvel a Harley Quinn and Groot movie.
That would never happen. Also, that's bad. That seems just like a bad combo. Besides, like she talks fast and he can only say, "I am Groot."
Harley and Rocket's the way to go.
I would not be against a. No, that's 2 fast talkers. Rocket and King Shark, though.
Yeah, that's where it's at.
I would not be against a Vin Diesel Margot Robbie pairing.
Yeah.
Just in general. Oh god, I don't know how the fuck we're gonna talk about Star 80.
I thought it was good. That's all I have to say about Star 80.
Fucking Star 80.
I'm gonna get some burps on your end, I apologize.
Oh yeah, sweet burpage. Hachi Machi. Ralph Macchio. Did you ever see my tweet where it's the story of Hachiko, but it's Ralph Macchio?
No, I've not.
The Final Days of Hugh Hefner would be a fascinating and terribly sad movie.
Oh, we didn't almost get that. We did almost get the Hugh Hefner, Brett Ratner movie with Jared Leto.
Well, it was originally supposed to be RDJ, and then it was developed originally with RDJ, and RDJ's like, no way. Like after what, like he get like his better judgments came to him, and then wasn't Depp rumored for a while as well?
I don't know. I only heard about it with Leto.
Yeah. Leto was officially cast at one point. Wasn't there a crazy thing where Hugh Hefner was like, I'm getting married at like 92, and then like very quickly it was called off.
No, I think he actually he did get married.
Yeah, just like he was in his 80s and he still slept in like a bed full of like 20-year-old girls. Just, he barely move.
He got married in 2012.
Yeah. I remember there was a big thing where it was like the cover was like his bride to be, and I think very soon after that she called it off, and I think the issue got recalled.
Jeez, poor Hugh.
I don't know about poor Hugh. I don't know if we want to hitch our wagon to that train.
That's true. That'd be too big of a stretch for me to go on.
I'm gonna put it politely as Hugh Hefner was a complicated guy.
He was. Yeah, really quickly.
Yeah.
You texted me yesterday when you watched it who he looked like.
Yes. Who do you think he looks like?
He doesn't have a mustache. I see Bo Knapp in The Nice Guys, Blueface guy.
Oh, that's interesting. That is another one. Yeah, that's another good one. Mine was Ashton Kutcher. There are certain angles where, like, just like his eyes, particularly the eyes and his jaw. Like, if you get him like from this angle, and just like the way his hair lies out, I'm like, oh my god, that's Ashton Kutcher.
Interesting.
Yeah, he's not tall enough, and it's not always. It's just like in certain moments, and I'm like, that looks like Ashton Kutcher.
Interesting. I'm not going to rewatch the movie, but I'll have to like.
Who has a very similar, like, very handsome, but also kind of Weasley feel.
Yeah.
I don't think as good an actor as Eric Roberts. Oh god, we're a couple of messy bitches.
We are.
All right.
That's why I love us, Steve.
That's why I love us too. And Fosse. Marsha Graham.
Well, Steve, the odds against us are at least 100-1.
Connor, those are the best odds I've ever had. I'm gonna do that again. I hated my take. I'll just go to that. Those are the best odds I've ever had. Ah, fuck! I'm in my head tonight. I'm in my head tonight. This is me being Rick Dalton in that trailer. I'm kicking a mirror. Those are the best odds I've ever had. That's fine. It's like resonant. It's like It's like wistful.
See, you know how broken my brain is?
What?
When you said that's fine, it's rat. I think I say it's Ratatouille. I don't know why.
Connor, anyone could cook.
Anyone could cook. Here, I'm gonna stop the recording.
I am too.